Today is April 11, 2023, and this is the interview of Jane Young. This is part of the Legal History Project, the oral history project of the National Bar Association Historical Committee. And I'm Mary Burrs, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Jane. Hello, Jane. How are you today?
I'm good.
We're so glad that you're here. We're
Thank
so
you.
glad that you are participating in the Oral History Project.
Good.
And we're here to talk about your professional life and what a life it has been. And we're going to start at the very, very beginning and go from there. Where were you born and when were you born?
I was born December 24th, 1956, Christmas Eve,
Yes.
here in Nashville.
And you were a Nashville native,
I am.
which is quite unusual these days. Somebody who born and bred in Nashville. Tell us about your mom and dad.
My parents were both from East Tennessee, or my dad was from, I guess, what we would call the Cumberland Plateau. My mother was from Anderson County, Clinton, Tennessee. Actually, her folks had lived over in the Robertsville area, which later was the federal government came in and took that land in order to build Oak Ridge during the time of World War II. My dad was from Overton County, Livingston, Tennessee.
I know Livingston very well.
Yes, it's my grandmother did not live there when I was a child. She had moved to Michigan, and so we didn't have a lot of occasion to go to Livingston. However, I spent a lot of time in Clinton, where my maternal grandmother lived.
Did you have siblings?
I am an only child. I do
Only
not.
child. What was your childhood like?
Oh, I had a very, very, I guess we would call it now an idyllic childhood. I grew up in Creve Hall, which is now becoming a sort of hot spot to live, but it was my parents had moved to Creve Hall shortly before I was born, to a new house. And so I attended Creve Hall Elementary and McMurray Junior High and Overton High School. But we had a great childhood. We had friends in the neighborhood, and we spent time outside, and it was just a very, very sort of typical, I think, for many of us, sort of mid-century childhood in the new suburbs with post-war parents.
That's a very nice childhood. One that you probably have very good memories from that time in your
Yes,
life, don't you?
yes, I do. I have friends that I've reconnected with, high school friends. We're coming up on graduated from high school in 1974. We're coming up on our 50th reunion.
Already.
So that's coming up, and I've reconnected with some folks, and I'm looking forward to that, and hearing stories and reminiscing. So it's very interesting.
Were you a reader as a child?
I did. I read a lot. As an only child, you have time, and yes, I read a lot. I read. There were a lot of biographies that were written for children. I read that. I read, of course, typical children's books, but I was interested in Nancy Drew, those types of things.
And getting into your high school years, were there activities that you enjoyed doing, extracurricular activities?
Well, I I was involved in some clubs. I was on the yearbook staff, and that became very, very important and a lot of work, and I enjoyed that. I was involved, I was the manager for the high school girls basketball team. And that was very interesting. I ended up being the scorekeeper. And so I had to keep the books. And my friend and I were at practice every day and got to know the girls and really be part of a team. So I really enjoyed that. My friends and I, went to football games and
So
we
nice.
did a lot of
Nice
activities.
high school experience.
Yes, I had a good experience. In fact, I just recently had lunch with a friend who lives in Houston, who called me out of the blue, was going to be back in town, and so we were reminiscing about a lot.
That's wonderful.
Yes,
That's just wonderful.
yes,
You headed on to college.
I did.
Where did you go and why did you go there?
Well, I went to Samford University. My parents had graduated from the University of Tennessee and were big ball fans. And I grew up going to football games, going to my grandmother's, and my folks going over to Knoxville, which is just, over a little ways from Clinton. But I think my parents felt that it was too big and too, get lost kind of place. And so I applied to Samford. Samford is a Baptist institution. I grew up Baptist. And so it's a beautiful campus. And so we just determined that would be a good place for me. So
And Birmingham's not that far from
It's-
Nashville.
it's not that far. It's about
Right.
3 hours
Right.
and 3 to 3.5 hours. And so, yes,
What did you major in?
I majored in English and minored in history.
Are you looking back, are you glad that you chose that?
I am.
Major and minor.
I think that I had convinced myself, and perhaps it's true and perhaps it's not, that I was not gifted in science and in math, although I was able to, take the courses that were needed. But I enjoyed reading and writing. And so I'm glad that I majored in English, and I think that the discipline of learning to write well is an important one for lawyers.
But were you thinking about law school at the time? Or?
Well, I was. I did not have lawyers in my family, but I felt like that, my gifts leaned toward English. And although I would go on to get a teaching certificate, or to at least get the requirements in order to get a teaching certificate, I knew that I needed to do something to earn a living. I had worked in college and after high school had done a lot of clerical type work, typing and answering the phone and that sort of thing at businesses. And I knew that I really didn't want to do that I wanted something different. And I think that I felt that law would be the sort of thing that I could earn a living doing, and build on what I felt were my skill sets.
But looking back at your college years, did college change you? You were just 18 years old when you started college. did it change you? Did it teach you some lessons? Perhaps not just your courses, but just some life lessons.
Oh, yeah, I think it teaches you, I learned, I think, some independence. It led a fairly sheltered childhood and adolescence. So I think that, I met some different people, although it's pretty homogeneous. But I think that I learned some independence. I learned some people skills. I was involved in a sorority, and I was the pledge trainer. They call it something different now, but I was in charge of training the new young women that joined, and so I think that it taught me a little bit about getting along with people. I developed some confidence. We did some participated in something called step scene, which is a contest / production where various campus groups do choreographed music and singing. And we did that every year. And so you're going on stage and there's a lot of practicing. And we had someone that choreographed it for us. And I think those sorts of things that I probably, it gave me some confidence. So I think in that sense, it did change me.
Isn't that interesting, in the middle of activities like that there's a learning experience, a learning curve, even that way, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's a learning curve, and just the interactions with people and learning to, I think that some of the things sort of gave me a little bit of training in leadership.
Interesting. Not just being on your own, but taking a position and following through on something. You decided after college to go to law school, is that right? There was no time intervening.
That's correct.
Yeah. And how was that for you? Was that a culture change?
Well, for one thing, it was a real culture change going to the University of
I
Tennessee.
could have asked you, where did you go?
I went to the University of Tennessee, and yes, that just the campus and all of that, and of course,
Sure.
law school is its own separate entity.
Sure.
And so, yes, it's, I think as we go forward in our education, or the folks that we're in school with, it gets narrower and narrower. And so I think it's interesting to be, a very, very good student in high school, and then suddenly you're in college and you write something and it would have gotten you a great grade in college. I mean, in high school, doesn't. And the same sort of thing. It's very much a culture shock going to law school.
It's a smaller pool,
it's
isn't
a
it?
smaller pool, and there's a well, I had not learned through what they call the Socratic method, but
There it was.
but whatever it is,
Right.
had not obviously had training in that. And so that was new and different and at times scary.
Sure. Sure. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do at the end of this?
Well, I think I knew that folks had, I decided that I wanted to clerk for a judge. And I knew that that would be a short-term thing, but I knew that that would be something that a lot of people do as a midway between law school and going into their career.
Sure.
And that there's a lot to be learned from doing that.
Right, right. When between the time that you graduated from high school and the time that you completed law school, it's about 7 years, is that right? Who are some of the people in those 7 years? It was quite an education that you had during those years. Who are some of the people that, as you think back, influenced you?
Well, I think in college, I had a professor for whom I worked, and she was a professor of history, Dr. Carol Satterfield. And she was kind of a remarkable person. And, was a wonderful teacher. And I think I just learned a lot from my association with her. I had other teachers as well, but there again, I think our colleagues and the friendships that we make, I think it have a lot of influence on us. And so I think a lot of my friends from college have had influence on me. Older, when I was a freshman, there was a person who was a senior who lived in my dorm, and I learned a lot from her. Those sorts of things.
That's a wonderful insight to have, that your peers, people that you were learning with.
Absolutely. I had the opportunity to, and this was an interesting thing. I think I knew that I was interested in law school, but I took a course in Alabama, because Samford is in Birmingham, Alabama history. And this was sort of the beginning of oral histories. And we interviewed, my friend and I interviewed for our project, Janie Shores, who was on the Alabama Supreme Court and had come from very humble beginnings. And that was a very, as I recall, that was an influential moment to learn about that. And so that was one thing. Then moving forward, peers in law school, professors, Professor Forrest Lacey, who was at University of Tennessee, who taught contracts, and then was very Socratic in his approach. But I recall my study group. I had a study group, as a lot of people do in their first year. And I recall having lunch with, our study group had lunch with Professor Lacey, and he said some things that were insightful, which was that he felt like the people that had not gone directly to law school from college, but those who had been out in the world a little bit working, perhaps did a little better in terms of their confidence level. And I think there's probably some truth to that. So, you just pick up little things like that you need to learn. But I had friends that I made in law school and that I studied with, and I can recall going over outlines prior to an exam, the one exam. But I also learned that you can just buckle down and get through it. I took evidence, and we had a professor who was very, very esoteric, and it didn't make a lot of sense to be honest. And I recall the night before the exam, almost in a panic, because I thought, I don't know anything. And then I said to myself, you make a pot of tea and get out. It was going to be open book, get out the rules of evidence and start reading them. And I did, and I did fine because, you know, relevant, whatever the first rule, all evidence that's relevant is admissible. And then
And it went on from there.
it went on from there. And then I thought, oh, well, I get this. And so I think that was the other thing, is that when your back's to the wall, if you just calm down and, think logically, you can accomplish things.
That's a wonderful insight that you had early on, and I imagine helped and was a mainstay for you in later years of practice, wasn't it?
It was to try to realize that, okay, this is what we have, this is where we are. Let's move forward.
And I would imagine pretty good advice to be giving any person going into the practice of law.
Oh, yes, yes,
To do
yes.
that.
And I think when we have folks that affirm that
Yes,
in that with us, I think that's very helpful.
yes, yes. At the end of law school, you, of course, took the bar and passed that awful thing, that ordeal in itself. And then what did you do?
Okay, so I had started actually before I learned that I had passed the bar. But that summer I took the bar in Knoxville because I wanted to stay where I had my friends and so forth.
I'm going to interrupt you just to give a sort of a time frame of when this all occurred. You graduated from college in what year?
I graduated from college in 1978.
Okay, and then graduated from law school in
1981.
Okay, that gives us sort of a time frame.
Right.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No
Go on.
worries. I went to, I began clerking for Judge Lewis. After taking the bar, I moved back to Nashville and I began clerking for Judge Sam Lewis on the Court of Appeals. Judge Lewis was from Pulaski, but of course maintained an office in Nashville. It was in Pulaski. His assistant, his secretary, was in his Pulaski office. So I had sort of the run of the mill in Nashville, and then he would come up, of course, for oral argument, and he would also come up once a week on Thursdays.
And you would meet with him?
I would meet with him. The practice at that time was that after the oral arguments, when the cases were assigned, and then he would have certain cases that he would write, and then he would typically give me a case to write the opinion in, and then he would take one and he would tell me, we're going to affirm, and I would write the opinion, and then he would, change it or whatever needed to be done. And that's how we worked. We got those opinions out within 30 days. He was adamant that that be done. And so sort of learned that.
That was a wonderful discipline.
It was a wonderful discipline, and was important. Judge Lewis was a good mentor, had a great work ethic, and yeah.
But when you thinking back to that time, you had gone to law school and now you were clerking for Judge Lewis. Clerking must have been like an extension of law school for you, or
Yeah,
was it-
in some ways, there were, I met some wonderful people. Kimberly Dean was clerking for, Judge Ben Cantrell. Judge Cantrell was in the next office. He, of course, was there every day. And his, wonderful, secretary, Miss Catherine. John Tarpley was there. I had known John from law school. He was clerking for Judge Lou Connor, and his office was across the hall from mine. And so, yeah, there were a great many people. There were also friends that we had met that were clerking on the for Supreme Court justices. Paul DeWitt was clerking for Justice Harbison, and Mike McWhorter was clerking for Justice Phones. And we were friends with both of those. And I recall one thing that was very interesting and it's something that you remember, and that was I had gone up. Our offices were on the second floor, and I'd gone to the third floor, I believe, to say something to Paul DeWitt. We were getting together or something with a group of people or something, and he was in an outer office, and I was speaking with him, and Justice Harbison came out of his office, and he said, "Oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry, I will." And I thought, "Oh no, you're Justice Harbison. We're through, bye-bye," because he wanted to speak to Paul. But I thought, what a gracious thing to try to apologize for interrupting. And those are the sorts of things that you just learn by doing, and that really make an influence on you.
what an example that is.
Yeah.
Justice Harbison was such a gracious.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And brought that to the bar
Yes.
and gave an example.
Yes.
To the law clerks.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And so yes, I agree.
And you were there. What an experience that must have been, because you named folks who are giants of the bar themselves.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And that includes this person I'm interviewing right now.
You're too kind. I don't know about that, but thank you.
But these are remarkable people who have influenced lawyers long after their time as being law clerks.
Right. Right.
And I suspect that they have been people that you have enjoyed the camaraderie with over the years.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
What a wonderful way to start.
Yes.
That friendship.
Yes. Yes.
During this time also, I believe that you met a fellow by the name of Bill Young.
I did.
Tell us about that.
Okay. Bill he had gone his first year of law school to Emory University School of Law, and there were a group of people that he went to first year with down there who all transferred out after 1 year. And one of those was Julie Fessmeyer, who transferred to UT. And so I became friends with Julie, and John Tarpley was good friends with Julie Fessmeyer and a group of people. And so they introduced us when I was clerking for Judge Lewis, right at the beginning of my time with Judge Lewis. And Bill at that time was clerking for Judge George Payne.
Oh my. Okay.
So we actually took the bar, we didn't realize it, but we had taken the bar at the same time.
Your
And-
stars had aligned even before.
Yeah. And then we passed it at the same time, and our bar numbers are two off.
Is that so?
Mine is 9709 and his is 9711 because my last name was Wright and his, of course, was Young.
So you.
There's
so
one person between us,
alphabetically,
right?
That's a remarkable story. And I asked you about Bill early on in our talking together, because so very often I would hear of Jane Young and Bill Young, like it was one sentence, Jane Young and Bill Young. And so at some point, you both married, is that right?
Yeah, we did. We
Yes.
married each other, yes.
And I'm going to weave back into law for a little bit.
Okay,
but we'll be
sure.
coming back to Bill after a while. After your clerkship with Judge Lewis, where did you go?
Okay, I took a few months to find a job. I remember Judge Lewis going to lunch one day when he was there, and a car almost ran over me, and
Oh,
he said, he said, well, if you won't have to worry about getting a job. But he was being facetious. But I went to the State Board of Equalization as a administrative law judge.
right out of, you had just he just graduated from law school, like 2 years or 1 year
Right.
before that.
Right,
And there you are, an ALJ.
right.
What did you do?
Well, the issue before the Board of Equalization has to do with the value of real property, and which is, of course, what property tax is based on. And so there is an appeals process for individuals who periodically there are reappraisals in counties where they reappraise the property, and the property owners, if they believe that it is incorrect, too high, they can appeal. The issue is, what is the fair market value of the property? So that was the issue that would come before us, and we would have multiple hearings scheduled. Typically, most property owners, particularly with residential property, were pro se. And we would go to various counties, and the hearings were scheduled in the county where the property is located. And so, we went to Memphis and Chattanooga and other areas. There was another young woman, Janice Craig, who started about the same time I did, and she was from Lauderdale County. I think she's a general sessions judge now down there. But we became fast friends and buddies because we sort of started at the same time. And
Did you travel together?
occasionally, we would travel together. There was I had Jim Johnson was one of the ALJs that had been there for a while. He sort of took us under his wing and showed us the ropes. Janice and I took some property appraisal courses. There's a whole field where you can get designated as a member of the Appraisal Institute. I think that's what it's called. But the first couple of courses are taught by appraisers, and we took one which was at the University of Georgia, and we took a 2-week. Well, it was a 1-week course and a test, and then a 1-week course built on that, and a second. So we learned about the principles, the basic principles of property appraisal, and we worked with people, and then we also provided support for the Assessment Appeals Commission, which is another step in the appeal, and that those people are appointed. I'm not sure by whom, the governor or but that was interesting because we heard one case that was very interesting involving the appraisal of unusual property in Copper Hill, Tennessee, in Polk County, which is over in southeast Tennessee near the Ocoee River. And the plant that I think had been abandoned or at some point, I don't, but there were attorneys from Vespery and Sims that were representing the company, and then the property appraisal was represented by the county attorney in Polk County. And so that was very interesting to watch the lawyers do that. And then afterwards, the appeals commission made a decision, but then we had to write the opinion. And as I recall, they split the baby in some manner instead of sort of going with the evidence. And we had to sort of creatively write in order to try to come up with this, because they're just like other people. They want to give everybody a little something, I guess.
Sure. When you started with the State Board of Equalization, did you have any background or in law school, for example, on property appraisal?
No.
And so basically you went into this job where you were learning
Right. I mean, there were some legal issues occasionally, what I would call legal issues occasionally, dealing with exemptions. Is a parsonage part of a church property, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, we dealt with that, but certainly on the other, we learned a little bit in one of the courses about deeds and drawing off from a deed onto learning such and such degrees and that sort of thing. Interestingly, I took an interest in that, and I think my boss would have allowed me to take more courses in that because I showed an interest, but I didn't have the opportunity, as it turns out. But it's interesting because because Bill's father was a land surveyor, and his brother is a land surveyor, and so that's what they do. And so it's very interesting.
Well, and just from what you've told us already, of course, with the State Board of Equalization, you learned a new field, a new aspect of legal practice, and to a great extent, also, I think, clerking for Judge Lewis, you were going into areas of the law in some of those cases where you had never had a course in law school. Isn't it interesting how law school prepared you, though, for going into fields and areas that you might not necessarily know anything
Yes,
about?
and I think that's one of the things that I like about being a lawyer, and that is the opportunity to learn about, in some detail, often, about other areas of other disciplines, and there's a curiosity about it, and because of the nature of what we're doing, we have the opportunity to actually, ask questions from the experts, if you will. And so, yes, that was true.
And as an ALJ, you got to interpret the law or apply the law, would be a better way of saying it, to very specific individual circumstances in ways that meant a lot to the property owners.
Yeah. I would say that's true. Yes.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah, and as we go along, I bet that you'll be showing us other ways that you learned to apply just legal thinking
mhm.
to different circumstances, and that's what's interesting.
Yeah.
That's a theme
Mhm.
in your professional life
Mhm.
that was very, very apparent when we first talked together. Anyway, let me go on.
Okay.
So how long did you work for the?
Well, I worked probably a little over a year, not very long. We were married during that time, and Bill was leaving his clerkship with Judge Payne, and he got a job with actually a Memphis law firm, but they had a DC office, and he was hired to for the DC office with the partner that worked in DC. So we had to go to DC. So we did, and I
What a
applied.
change that was. for
Right,
you.
right. And I applied for a number of jobs, and I got a job with the United States Department of Health and Human Services, the Grant Appeals Board, which is a sort of, there again, an esoteric group of people who would hear appeals from disallowances, as they called them, from grants that had been given to entities by HHS. So in other words, there were grants to some small agencies under the Older Americans Act. And then there were also large, huge grants, Medicaid, to states. And so people spend against the grant, and then it's audited. And then sometimes they will say, well, no, this is not appropriate, but there's an appeals process for that. Now, I was not an administrative law judge. They had people that were ALJs, but I was a staff attorney that worked for the ALJs.
And so you were involved in reviewing the request for an appeal from a
Right,
disallowance.
right. They would write opinions. It was a little bit, they'd have a briefing schedule and that sort of thing. And so that's the type of work, that we did.
Were there hearings on those?
I think most of there were, but I think that they were mostly held because they were all over the country. They were held by speaker. They were sort of held, I mean, this was prior to virtual, but they were, because they were sort of paper intensive, I imagine. And so I think that's.
Were you involved in the ultimate decision on a disallowance, or?
Well, no, the decision had been made. But then I guess the ALJs could decide whether it was appropriate or not. But I would just really provide support, did a lot of research when I first started, and that case had come down from the US Supreme Court. I don't recall dealing with something, and the head of the unit asked me to review it and summarize it, that sort of thing, because it was the sort of work that I could do, but I wasn't really there very long.
But this was all within perhaps your first 10 years of being out of law school, is that right?
Yes.
Thinking back now to what you had done.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. That's a lot of territory. And was that unsettling to change from one type of area of law and then be jumping into
a little bit. The DC job, the HHS job, was not particularly satisfying. It was particularly bureaucratic, and maybe if I'd stayed longer, but I think that there was a lot of dynamics within the office that made it difficult. And
you say that you were not there very long. What happened?
Well, the Bill's job was he was actually working for a partner who had sort of one client, if you will, or one group of clients that he worked for. I think he had actually worked for one of the companies, but he represented railroads in equalization cases. And there had been a number of US Supreme Court cases about that. And so he was doing that, but then there was another associate. And so Bill was actually not, as it turned out, doing work for Mr. McBride. And he was actually doing work for one of the Memphis partners, John Ryder, who became a close friend and mentor. So sort of at a crossroads where there's really no reason for him to be doing this. And so we decided, I mean, he looked for another job, had an opportunity to stay in DC, but it was going to involve a lot of travel and so forth. So we decided that we would return to Nashville. And so we made inquiries, and I interviewed with the Attorney General's office. We called Bill Hubbard. Bill had clerked at the AG's office in law school and knew Bill. And so.
And Bill Hubbard was the chief.
At that point, he was the chief deputy. When we came back to Nashville, General Leach had left the position and General Cody had just been appointed. And so Mike Cody was the Attorney General, but Bill was still there for a few months.
Thinking back, you and Bill were pretty much the same number of years of experiences as you went along. And you were both forging your individual paths in practice of law. That was a time that was, I imagine for you both, that was a time of some pretty steep learning in terms of acquiring new skills, learning about new areas of the law. That was something that you were both doing together, right?
Yeah, in many ways, yes. Yeah. Yes, I think he did a lot of for John when we were in DC. John had a pretty hefty bankruptcy practice in terms of creditors, and so he could sort of use his experience with Judge Payne there. But yes, yeah, we were both learning and new, and
the world was still ahead of you. The world was ahead still.
Yeah.
For you both.
Yeah.
And let me take you to the Attorney General's office. You're back in Nashville.
Right.
Go from there.
Okay, so we came back to the Attorney General's, I came back to the Attorney General's office. I started in the criminal division, as many people do. They were always looking for folks. And I did criminal appeals, appellate work I was on the eastern section, so I traveled to Knoxville almost exclusively. I don't know that I did any appeals in Nashville or West Tennessee.
That's how it was structured at that time, that an assistant attorney general would be assigned to one of the grand divisions of
Exactly. And so you would do appeals from that grand division, and then you would argue if you were in East, you would argue in Knoxville when they sat. So that's what I did. At that time, the Attorney General's office, the criminal division, I guess it was called, also handled what I think generally is called civil rights cases. They represent primarily the Department of Correction in cases that are brought by prisoners, alleging that their civil rights have been, their constitutional rights have been abridged in some manner. And so I ended up with a lot of those cases. And eventually I think probably began to be more of my, they also represent the Department of Safety, administrative, in appeals from administrative hearings involving things like altered VIN numbers, things like that.
So you had sort of a hybrid.
So I had sort of a hybrid. Clearly the civil rights was trial work. and it was primarily in federal court. So there were cases in the various federal courts
Yes,
throughout, because there's prisons pretty much
sure,
in all districts.
sure.
And a number of them, of course, at that time it was Main Prison, the old Main Prison. And those, of course, were in Nashville.
And safety and correction would be two logical departments in which you would probably find more civil rights cases
Yeah,
filed against because of the the
right,
closeness between the plaintiff and the plaintiff's civil rights and
Exactly.
the effect of
right.
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So I did that. Yeah, I did that for a while, and then the office kind of changed, and the division sort of morphed into different things, and there actually became a division that was separate from criminal that did civil rights cases. And then at that point, the legislature had enacted the Claims Commission Act,
So this is
which
around-
sort of replaced the Board of, the Board of Claims is still there, but sort of replaced the Board of Claims process and created the Claims Commission process as we know it. And so I handled cases before the Claims Commission as well.
And the time frame for that was around 1985. Is that right? 1984, 1985.
I came back to the office in 84 and 85, and I'm not sure when the Claims Commission Act.
Might have been around 1985, 1986.
Okay.
At
Okay.
latest. So there you were handling claims against the state for money damages
Yes,
in the Claims Commission,
right.
as well as civil rights claims against individual state officials in federal court. So you were in a number of different places.
Yes, yes. And
That's interesting work.
yes, yes, it is. It's, I mean,
What would be
it's
the-
a really, really good way. I will say this, it's particularly the civil rights cases, because they're jury trials for the most part. The department demands a jury. And there's really very little settlement. And so it's one way to get jury experience in federal court.
You were learning a lot.
So that's a lot. And I mean, there's some motion practice and so forth. But yes, I mean, you are able to to go to federal court and to learn the rules of evidence and to learn how to try a case and pick a jury, all of those things.
So after everything that you had already learned Big Board of Equalization, your clerkship with Judge Lewis, your work down in DC, you're coming into yet another kind of practice of law, which was much more of a litigation practice. Would that be fair to say?
Very much so, very
Yeah.
much so. I mean, it started with the appellate,
That's right.
but the litigation, I would say, pretty much all I did at the Attorney General's office was litigation.
Wow, it's like law school kept on going for you, did it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
seemed
I
like-
added the Claims Commission, but I did multiple cases in federal court. I
Really?
did several Claims Commission cases, which was, of course, a trial practice. And then I left that division and went to the Civil Litigation and State Services Division, and I handled the primary part of my work there was employment cases, and that involved litigation as well.
What were, from your time in the Attorney General's office, what were some of the cases that were particularly significant?
Okay, well, to me, I mean, I got pulled in fairly early on in the Grubbs lawsuit, which had already been tried.
What is the Grubbs
The
lawsuit?
Grubbs lawsuit is a prison conditions lawsuit that was brought by prisoners due to primarily overcrowding of the prisons
Throughout the state?
throughout the state.
Yeah.
And when I came in, I think they were in the remedy phase, if you will, where a special master had been appointed. And so there were various issues that were occurring, and we would have to brief those or do research on those and deal with those issues. We got to work with General Cody some because he actually argued at one point, and I was seated next to him when he argued. He called Odell Horton Jr. was a law clerk at that time, and
In the AG's office?
yes, and he and I worked together, and then this was the old federal courthouse, and I remember Odell, General Cody had a state car, and driving us to the federal courthouse in front of Judge Nixon and dropping us off, and we go up to argue, and then, well, General Cody was going to argue against Gordon Bonham, and it got toward the end, and it was about time, and General Cody handed me a quarter and free cell phone, told me to go call Odell to tell him to come pick us up. So I did. And
These are amazing. These are amazing people in their own right.
yeah, it was great. Odell and I became very, very good friends. So yeah, it's sort of don't realize it at the time, but finally, I remember years later, and Grubbs was finally over, and General Burson had a big meeting outside.
Charles Burson.
Yes, who was the Attorney General later. He asked everybody to raise their hand or stand up or something who had worked on Grubbs, and about half the people in the audience raised their hand. He goes, "Grubbs is over." So that was something important. There were a lot of meetings about that. I had just a lot of different cases. Handled a claims commission case that ultimately went to the state Supreme Court involving that I worked with Stephanie Reavers, and involved a young man who was on a golf course and struck by lightning at a state park. And the question was whether essentially the state was negligent in not providing a lightning-proof shelter or warning people to get off the course. And so we had to get a golf course architect and all of that. But the case ultimately, we won at the trial court at the claims commission, and then the Court of Appeals reversed and ordered that a judgment be rendered in favor of the plaintiff, the widow of the man who had died, at $300,000, which was the limit.
That it was reasonably foreseeable to the
Right,
state that it should
right, that we should have somehow,
provided.
yes, it wasn't an act of God or anything.
Yeah.
And so then they had to seek review with the Tennessee Supreme Court, and they ultimately reversed an opinion by Justice Drowoda. So that was very interesting, and it was interesting to it was at Warriors Path State Park, and Stephanie and I had to go to Upper East Tennessee, in the Tri-Cities area, and we went to the golf course and made pictures and all of that. So that was a tragic incident, but interesting. The main case, though, that I had the privilege of being involved in was after I moved to the class division, which also handled, in addition to employment, handled education. And we were I was on a team of people that represented the state in the Tennessee Small Schools
That
case,
was a
which
major,
involved the
major case.
right, the constitutionality of the state constitutionality. Well, the constitutionality under the state constitution of the basic education program formula for funding local schools. And
What was the argument that
well, the argument was twofold. One was that it violated the education clause. And then the other argument was that with the education clause state constitution, which says something like the General Assembly shall provide for a system of free public schools. And then the other was the state equal protection. And that's ultimately what the Supreme Court decided, that it violated equal protection under the state constitution. There was no rational basis for it, but that involved months of discovery, and a 6-week trial before Chancellor High. We didn't meet on Fridays.
C. Allen High
Yes,
and Chancery Court, Davidson County.
right, Chancery Court in Davidson County. So we were over there every day except for Fridays for 6 weeks. And we all, the team consisted of actually General Burson was there every day. And so for the state, we had General Burson and Rachel Steele, and then I was there as well as Andy Hoyle.
Again, some major,
Right,
incredible lawyers.
right. And then we had the interveners, as we call them, which were the large school systems who liked the formula because they felt that because they had the ability to raise the funds within their tax base. And that was Memphis City, Metro, Chattanooga, Hamilton, groups of folks like that. And they were represented by Ernest Kelly of Memphis and some other individual lawyers. But he was the lead lawyer for all of the interveners. And then, of course, Baker Donaldson, Mr. Louis Donaldson, had taken on the case for the small school system. And so he and associates and other lawyers from Baker Donaldson tried the case. And
Remarkable lawyers, all in one room. I say remarkable lawyers, all
yes,
all in one room.
yes. And so we were there, and so it was a lengthy process with lots of witnesses, and General Burson had certain witnesses, and he did the closing argument. And the one thing that I do recall, and that is that at the end of the trial, after the discussions were made about pre-trial, post-trial briefs and so forth, and when we could get those in and all of that sort of thing, Chancellor High, they adjourned court, and Chancellor High came down off of the bench. We were all standing and shook the hands of each lawyer.
It was a remarkable trial.
Yeah, and it was just a remarkable moment because I knew that, win, lose, or draw, we had been part of something important.
Yes.
And that was
and it was a trial of a thoughtful, thought-provoking trial.
yes.
Intense and intense in terms of legal analysis as well. So it was a great trial on a number of different levels.
Yes,
wasn't it?
yes, it was. Just the interesting legal issues, the fact that there had been cases in numerous other states.
Yes. And you did a cross-examination of a young man during that trial that has a lot to do with expressing the state's position.
Well, yeah, the plaintiff's position was that the funding formula was not fair and caused these small schools districts or these more rural and didn't have the tax base, and therefore they couldn't raise enough money for schools to provide a quality education. And so one of the school systems was Grundy County. And so at one point in the trial, they brought in,
a small school,
which is a small school
county.
system, and
Yeah.
it's in a rural, very impoverished area.
Yeah.
And so they brought in a student from Grundy County, a young man who was in high school. And, you know, they had brought things forward like sort of anecdotal evidence at times that there were textbooks that didn't go far enough, that didn't show man on the moon and things like that. And so they brought these folks in. And of course they brought in, and we couldn't interview or depose every witness. We did have his name, and were able to get his school records. So it fell to me to cross-examine him as one of the junior lawyers on the team.
And you're doing this cold.
And I'm doing it pretty cold because I just have his records. But I took a chance, and because I knew he was a good student, and he was at the age where he would be applying to colleges. And I asked him where he applied. He said, well, I've applied to, and he listed a bunch of very prestigious colleges, Vanderbilt, Duke, Harvard. And so I went further and I said, well, what do you think your opportunities are, or how do you feel about your chances of getting in to these colleges, or admission to these colleges? And he said, I think it's pretty good with my grades and so forth. And so I just said, no further questions. And because my point I felt had been made. In other words, if you feel that you can get into these colleges, then you've got to have had an okay education.
And then it felt
And what made me feel really good was that Ernest Kelly then had the opportunity to cross-examine, and he stood up and he said, I think the Attorney General has handled this. And I thought, well, this is pretty fun.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Isn't that great? And it was one of those moments, wasn't it, that captured a whole position in a case of
Well, yeah, we ultimately lost. So
well, but nevertheless,
but
it was as good
yeah,
a way of arguing the
Yeah.
case's position
right,
as you could find, wasn't it?
yeah.
The Attorney General's office is a remarkable place. Were there people there that were?
Oh yeah,
Particularly-
it's upset. I think this is really where I learned to practice law. But you know, colleagues, just learn different things from different people. Jerry Smith was my deputy when I started. He's a wonderful storyteller. It's also a person that you could go to and say, hey, I think I screwed up. I did such and such. And then he would say, well, it can't be as bad as what I did once. And then he would proceed to tell you, you know, some horrible thing
Make
that
you feel
supposedly had
better.
occurred. And so there was a real feeling of camaraderie and teamwork that I've tried to emulate in all the jobs that I have. So there was that. I think the fact that there was not particular competition among assets, salaries, positions, I think helped to contribute to that. But certainly Knox Walkup,
Oh
who
my.
was, when I was there, he was the chief deputy and later solicitor general. He's just a wonderful person that has the breadth of his knowledge and ability to understand multiple things is amazing.
And to inspire people.
Right. He's very inspirational. His going away speech was one of the best speeches I've ever heard. I loved General Cody, his loyalty and ability to have your back.
Did you work
And
with Gordon?
yeah, in Gordon,
Yes.
yes, I loved Gordon. He was able to give you the ins and outs, and no question was too dumb. And so
And of course, Kimberly Dean.
Kimberly Dean was a colleague and an excellent administrator and friend, and excellent trial lawyer, and learned a lot from her.
A dedicated deputy also.
Yes, yes. I think she had became deputy after I left, but John Southworth was one of my deputies. Good. Raymond Leathers was a great boss. Michael Catalano. The list just goes on and on. So David Himmelreich was able, learned a lot from him. Tried a case together. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Bill Farmer. Bill Farmer came on at one point, and he was brought in to assist with trial lawyers. He'd been federal public defender, had also worked at the assistant U.S. attorney, and I learned so much from him. He tried, he helped me with a case in East Tennessee before Judge Hall, and just the things that I learned. We were up there preparing, just interviewing witnesses and so forth. One time, I remember it was cold, and he was driving a car. We were representing a highway patrolman who had supposedly inappropriately or arrested these people and beaten them up and so forth. And some of it didn't occur. And but we were on the road, and I said, "Oh, look, there's a trooper car in this cafeteria's parking lot." And this was in Greenville, Tennessee. And he goes, "Oh, what?" And he just pulled in. So we go in. We don't know who it is or anything. We go into this cafeteria, and we're getting something to eat. And he just goes up to the guy and goes, "Bill Farmer." And the guy goes, and he was somebody we needed to talk to, gave his name. So we sat down and talked to him.
That's remarkable.
And so he just, that kind of thing. And then he also taught me, we went in and talked to a witness. He goes, "Now we're not going to take any notes in or anything. We're going to go in and we're going to talk to the witness and get the information that we need." And then the minute we got back in the car, he starts, "Write this down, write this down, write this down." And so the idea being that you can learn a lot more when you don't have notes in front of you, but then you need to make sure that you write it all down. So just little things like that.
What an opportunity to learn.
Yes, he was great. And so yes.
And the whole AG's office was like this concentration of giants.
Well, it was, and so yeah.
All those. I hate to leave the AG's office.
Yeah.
But you've got more professional life.
Yeah, I've got a couple more.
What did you do after the AG?
Okay,
And give us a time frame.
Okay, sure. This was I was at the AG's office from about 84 to about the beginning of 1993.
Okay.
My daughter had been born in 91, and so there was just the litigation was just really hard with having a baby at home and traveling. I had actually traveled with Steve Hart to Memphis and had been at a restaurant at midnight when the chancellor made us stay in court till like 10 o'clock at night, and we couldn't get back. And I sort of had an out-of-body experience. Like, I have a 5-month-old at home, and I'm sitting in a Perkins restaurant at midnight in Memphis, Tennessee. There's something wrong with this picture. So an opportunity came up. They were interviewing for staff attorneys at the Tennessee Supreme Court. And so I applied for a position and was hired.
And that's, of course, right here in Nashville.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Here in Nashville. And so that was I started there, I think in January of '93, I believe. Justice Riley Anderson was on the court and from Knoxville, from Oak Ridge. And I sort of was assigned to him. And after I started, apparently they had held up several projects to give. So I worked on several projects when I first started.
They're waiting for you to get there.
Yes, he came into my office the first day. We found the coffee pot, and then he started. But that was interesting. And also Karen Hornsby started that exact same day. She had more of a background in criminal law, so she was sort of hired for that as well. But then our offices, we were on that fourth floor, what had been the attic or whatever, and there was a door between our offices for some reason. And so we basically kept it open. I mean, she was facing different ways, but we became fast friends and could yell at each other from, one office to the other. But the primary work was, after those first few weeks, was to review the Rule 11 applications that are filed. And then we'd have a monthly conference and we would read the records to the extent we had to, and the applications and so forth, and make a recommendation as to whether it should be granted or.
And Rule 11 was what?
A Rule 11 is an application for permission to appeal with the Tennessee Supreme Court.
Under the Rules of Appellate Procedure.
Yes. And, just like I told someone, just like the poor, the Rule 11s will always be with us. When I got there was a room full of records. And so, yes. And so there was a group of staff attorneys and we,
that's job security.
It's job security, absolutely. And we had Justice Derwoda and others, Lyle Reed.
Justice O'Brien, was he?
He was there and then left, and then we had Justice Birch.
And Justice Derwoda?
Right, Justice Derwoda was there, was great. Sure. He was sort of the staff liaison, if you will.
Yes.
And so, yes, worked with Marshall Davidson. He went on to become he was a clerk for Judge Derwoda, and he was a staff attorney. He's a wonderful person. He went on to become a workers' comp judge, and then he left that. I think he's working for the Court of the Judiciary. And so he was really interesting and good to work with. Lots of people that were willing to. I had a really important memo to write, and I would have folks proofread it, and that was helpful.
What a wonderful environment to be.
Yes, it was, and we love teamwork. And as horrible as this is, the nights in that time, executions were. Prisoners who received the death penalty were scheduled like at 1 a.m. or something like that. And so we would anticipate we would have to be up there because different things would be filed and we would have to do reviews and so forth. And so often on those, because of the time sensitivity and others, we would have like somebody would be typing at their computer and somebody else would be standing to the side, and really that feeling of teamwork there again was good. I mean, in that sense, where more heads are better than one, and
right. That's a wonderful skill in itself for a lawyer to be working in a team and being part, not just being the only one out there. But
I think that there's so much that I just really don't see how people do it. otherwise,
Mhm.
to be honest. Um,
You really, it provides a multi-dimensional type of work, I would think, wouldn't it? Yeah.
yeah, and, I mean, there's a time and place. We have to write things and have to do things, but I think that the fact that they had the monthly conferences, similar to, I guess, what I don't know of the judges, but
Right.
where people would go through their case. I mean, they'd already distributed. I mean, you
Sure.
read everybody else's memos,
Right.
and then you were able to do that. So yeah, and to see the inner workings of the court was a valuable experience. And I mean, there again, research and writing, but the experience with colleagues and learning about the court in a more detailed fashion and was really, really valuable.
In your practice, you had the experience of working with some remarkable people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Remarkable people.
Yeah. I mean, Gloria
what an
Dale was the
opportunity.
chief staff attorney at the time. She commuted in from Columbia. And she is a remarkable person. And as I said, Karen is a great lawyer, had been a public defender and so forth. Sally Hood, I'd known her at the AG's office, but she had moved over there. Jane Workman, who is retired now, but she had been a longtime teacher. And so she did a remarkable job. They had an intern program where students would come up and we'd have to work, but Jane would do field trips and have them read books and meet
wonderful.
together. And so she did an excellent job with that.
Oh, and there was also the Scales Project of the Scales.
Oh, yes. The Scales Project started when we were there, and that was a Judge Riley Anderson initiative. And the Scales Project, I'm not sure what the acronym, Supreme Court. I'm not sure what the acronym is, but basically what it is they pick out cases that are set to be scheduled for oral argument. And they argue them in different communities. And students from high schools come in to view the argument. But prior to that, and we used to work with it some in as a staff attorney, we would help prepare some of the things. The information is prepared about the case that the students are going to argue, and local attorneys,
Or that they're going to hear.
they're going to hear,
Yes.
and local attorneys go to the school and talk to the students about it. And so I got to do that after I left the court. We moved in Chattanooga and I was not working. And so the Scales Project was coming to Chattanooga. And so I and another lawyer went to Central High School and presented to students that were going to see and answered their questions and so forth. And then I was actually at the Scales Project. I mean, I was at they had a luncheon afterwards. And so that was fun.
What a wonderful opportunity that was.
Yes, and it's a really, really good project because it's like when I first started, I actually had to work on the cameras in the courtroom because there had been no cameras in the courtroom. And Judge Anderson's thought about it, the reason that he wanted it is he said, I really want it because they can actually see how boring this really is. And kind of like C-SPAN. I mean, it's like.
But it's not boring.
Well, it's not boring. Not all of it's boring, but some of it is. But I think he wanted to dispel people from television.
Sure.
And that kind of thing.
Right. It's not Law and Order.
It's not Law and Order. And so I think that, but then this gives students the opportunity, and they try to pick out to the extent that they can cases that would be interesting for students.
Mhm.
It's not always
It's a wonderful opportunity for.
possible, but yes,
Sure.
yes,
Wonderful opportunity for a high school student to
Yes.
learn how the court works.
yes,
It was a gift that the court gave.
yes,
To the
I agree.
So you were in the state Supreme Court as a staff attorney for about how many years? Do you
I left probably at 10, close to
Okay.
10.
Okay, and,
Right.
and you said you moved to Chattanooga.
Yes, we moved to Chattanooga in 2003. Bill took a job with Blue Cross Blue Shield and
As general counsel.
as general counsel. And so that, we had to move to Chattanooga, so we did. And
And when in Chattanooga, did you have a professional or a job there?
I did not. I
Okay.
did not. My daughter was, our daughter was middle school and we were changing. And so it was an opportunity for me to do some other things. I did some volunteer work. I worked with, did some intake and answered questions, and actually took one or two minor cases, with, one of the pro bono services by the Bar Association. And I served as a foster care review, appeal and, that sort of thing.
Mhm, mhm.
But no, I didn't work.
It gave you an opportunity to focus perhaps on your family, and which was a good thing, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
It gave me an
sure.
opportunity to do that. I was not, I volunteered a lot at the school. And she was involved in a lot of activities, and so
Sure.
I was able to do all of that. And
That was a good time.
so that was a good time.
It was a
Yeah,
good time.
yeah.
But your professional life went on.
It did go on. It
What
did go on.
happened next?
Thankfully, I kept up my, we decided to move back to Nashville, at some point. That was in 2011.
2012.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I interviewed for, well, anyway, I was hired by the Department of Health, as the general counsel of the Department of Health.
Oh, the
Dr. John Dreisner had just been appointed as the commissioner, under the new Haslam administration. I started September 28th, 2011. And so I did that until I retired in 2020.
That was a remarkable time in your professional life.
Yes.
What as general counsel, what generally were you responsible for?
Yeah, well,
And then
it's a very, very big department. In the general counsel's office is quite large, primarily because there's sort of two chunks, if you will. And they're actually physically located in different buildings. So it's a little bit, at times can be very unwieldy a little bit in terms of if you are the general counsel. But one group, which is near the commissioner's office, is the group that handles what I call the public health functions. Your epidemiologists, your state, your county health departments, and so forth. And then attached administratively to the Department of Health is health licensure and regulation, which handles the various health-related boards, of which there are many, and board of medical examiners, optometrists, polysomnographers, veterinarians. I mean, on and on the list goes. When people question whether we regulate, we do. And so there's a group of lawyers who provide support to those boards, and also bring cases before the boards for disciplinary proceedings against licensees. For example, if there's overprescribing by a healthcare professional, one that can prescribe, a physician or a nurse practitioner or so forth, then that case is brought.
Yes.
And when I started, there were a real backlog of cases, and we worked hard to try to work through some of that. But many of them are very difficult. And of course, the jury, which is the board, doesn't sit that often. And there's an ALJ from the Secretary of State's office that sits, and then the board acts as sometimes they're in hearing panels, depending on what board and the number of cases. But so it's a lot of work, and they also do rulemaking and appear before the legislature. So that is
lots of moving parts in that.
Lots of moving parts.
Yeah, you handled some during your time as general counsel. There were some very significant cases that the Department of Health had to deal with. Tell us about some of those. Okay, well, the first one that really that comes to mind is, this was in 2000. Well, it wasn't that long. It may have been later. But there was a tainted medication had been sent throughout the country, actually, but to several providers in Tennessee from a compounding pharmacy, the New England Compounding Company. Famous case.
Right. And there were a steroid that was used to inject into the epidural space of for back pain, and it was contaminated with aspergillus, with a fungus that occurs everywhere because it wasn't done in a sterile manner, and actually was discovered by a person at Vanderbilt, a doctor at Vanderbilt, and working with our hospital-associated infections person at the time, Dr. Marion Kainer.
This is a remarkable story.
Yes, so they found it. They knew there was a cluster, and they finally determined what happened. So the thing just became, on a national scale.
There were a number of
And there were just tremendous moving parts, including the revocation of the license of the pharmacy. Had to learn about compounding laws, which I never had heard of before, but I did a whole thing on that. They have actually changed over some things because really these people are sort of manufacturing under the guise of pharmacy practice is what is occurring. And yet they didn't have the standards because pharmacies are different than manufacturers anyway. So there was a lot of that was going on, as well as the questions about identifying victims and so forth and so on. And there were multiple press releases and
it's spilling over into the court also.
Yeah, there was some they were actually the principals in that were criminally convicted in Boston because they were located in Boston. I mean, what went on was horrific, but it involved then sort of a change of laws on the national level, and then also rules regarding the upgrading of rules regarding sterile compounding in Tennessee. So we worked with the Board of Pharmacy over all of that. So that was quite a significant matter.
That was headline news across the country, wasn't it?
Yes. And then of course, and then the second thing that happened when Dr. Eisner was there was the two healthcare systems in Wellmont and Mountain States in the Tri-Cities area wanted to merge, and they would not have been allowed to under the antitrust laws. But there's an exemption for people that get a certificate of public advantage. They had the state law amended to include hospitals. They worked with us on it and we got some things, but then we had to we had to be in charge. And we had to issue well, we didn't have to, but they had to apply for a certificate of public opinion, just went on for months. And develop a person to be in charge. There was a whole group of people that were working on it within the department, and then we had to do rulemaking, and we had to go to Tri-Cities. We went to Washington, D.C. to meet with Virginia because they're also located in Virginia. And so that was quite a change and quite a responsibility, and got a lot of news, particularly in that area. So there was that, and then finally, I suppose, and I retired in the middle of it, but the COVID pandemic that came in, and that was after Dr. Dreisner had left. Governor Lee had been appointed, and he appointed Dr. Lisa Piercy as commissioner. And so that was quite, I mean, there again, there's just all these side issues that the public doesn't realize that you're dealing with. And so there were a lot of legal issues, and one of the primary ones that just kept us just tremendously under the gun were the request for public records. All the emails, it was unbelievable, the amount of public records. And of course, they have to be reviewed by somebody to make sure that there's not an exemption. And then they finally, backtracking a little bit, sort of an overarching thing that went on, that is still occurring but present. And then we worked with the AG's office on this. Some was the different aspects of it, but the opioid epidemic, and that's been a tremendous amount of work. And then with the lawsuits that were brought, there was litigation holds, and we had to work and develop questionnaires for every employee to go through and computerize to determine whether they need to put a hold on all their computers. And
as general counsel, I mean, it's astounding what you're saying. The amount of issues that the Department of Health.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I developed a tremendous group of lawyers that I worked with that I just enjoyed every day.
What do you think, if you had to, looking back at that experience, and the way you had to shift gears and go into any number of different areas, what do you think skilled you the best in being able to handle that variety of issues?
Well, yeah, and then I think really there needs to be a curiosity. I think that all learning sort of originates from curiosity about whether it be science or whatever, about how something works. And I know that was when we were hiring lawyers. When I first came to the Department of Health, we had a number of positions to fill, and so we were hiring people. And one of the things we wanted was somebody that was curious, particularly about, at that point, medical and health affairs. Because if you don't have a curiosity about how that works, this is going to get old real fast. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's it. It's like when the compounding came up, it was like compounding. And then, oh my goodness, there's all these articles about this. And this has been, existing forever, and something I'd never heard of before. Yeah. But I think that curiosity and to learn about it, I think helps. I mean, and there's not every case you're going to get is going to be that interesting. Right. but to deal, I mean, we had a lot, that was one of the things about the Department of Health. I mean, they work with a lot of doctors, and people in public health and, you know, very learned people, if you will. And, you know, I think that curiosity, and as I told a young lawyer, I mean, this was about something else, but we had to go, when we first started, we had to go to the Southeast region to Murray County and meet with the folks down there and in Columbia. And I told her, I said, now here's the thing. I said, we're going to go down and we're going to meet with these people. We're going to get the information we need. And we're going to, I said, by the time this is over, these people are going to love us because we are expressing an interest in what they're doing.
Right.
And it was true.
Yes.
And that's what I found throughout my career is that people will talk to you, whether it's you show up in a restaurant and stick your hand out and say, I'm Bill
Like Bill
Farmer.
Right.
But the expressing interest and really wanting to listen and to learn means so much.
Listen, just in the last hour or so, you've told us about your life. Would that have been something that was a constant for you since you were that little girl reading and loving history? And was that something that was always there?
I suppose so. I mean, you know, I think I've always wanted to, I mean, you know, not in every aspect, but yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, to learn about, and to express an interest, I think, in people. I mean, you know, to listen to them, to try to meet them where they are, I think is important. And I think that's just something, I think my parents, I mean, yeah, I think that there's, I think that was something that was, you know, instilled in me.
Yes.
In some manner.
And the other thing that is remarkable in what you've told us today is that you went to any number of different areas of the law, Court of Equalization. How different is that from the Department of Health? And how different is that from the Grubbs case? These remarkable changes and shifts that you were able to achieve.
Well, it's been interesting. It's been fun. I mean, it's as you say, as I told them when I retired, I said, you know, that's the thing that, you know, I mean, I'm that rare person that yeah, enjoyed being a lawyer. And part of it was that. I mean, you know.
Would you recommend this kind of practice or this kind of professional life?
Sure, I would. I mean, I think I think there's always room for, you know, for good lawyers, and I think I've been very fortunate to be able to have these interesting issues and to learn from the best, and so yeah, I mean, I think that a career in public service will give you that. It will teach you to practice law. It will give you some things that I think, you know, maybe other places not as much, but it's, you know, you still continue that. I have a friend that I worked with at the Department of Health. He moved to Mississippi. He's in private practice with a big law firm that has numerous offices, and he's in Tupelo. And he had a little bit back in the past, but his practice has shifted to copyright, trademark, that sort of thing. And it's just so interesting. He posts a lot on LinkedIn, and just very, very interesting things. And, you know, I find that interesting. I mean, even at this age, you know, it's like, well, if I do such and such, I feel like, hey, Andrew, is that a copyright violation? And So I think that it's just,
That curiosity is still there.
and
isn't
I
it?
think the curiosity is still there. And I think when that stops, then I think yeah,
I
no.
don't think it will ever stop.
I don't know. I don't know.
I just think that you are one of those wonderful lawyers that the Nashville community and the whole state has been so fortunate.
Oh, thank you so much.
And you and Bill both are just gifts to this whole community, both the lawyers and the people of the state. And such gratitude we should have for you, for everything that you've done and such an example that you provide.
Thank you.
For those coming who will listen to this interview of a remarkable professional life. Thank you, Jane Young, for this opportunity to hear it all. I feel so lucky.
Well,
know
I'm very grateful. This is very, very fun. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you, Mary.
And this will end the interview of Jane Young on April the 11th, 2023. But it probably may not end the professional life of Jane Young. There'll probably be more to come. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.